What's up guys, hello to Football Talk here. We've arrived at the end of draft season, just 3 or 4 days until the Tennessee Titans are on the clock with the first overall pick, depending on when I'm able to get this out there in the ether. And of course we'll again finish up with my ultimate mock draft, where I try to project all 32 picks of the first round. The top 6 for me ended up very much in line with general consensus, I'd say, outside of one small difference, because the purpose of this was for me not to shock anybody, but to get it right. And things falling into place that way just made too much sense for me. Beyond that, I did include a few trades and change-ups compared to what you often see. I want to dive right in, but just real quick, if you enjoy the analysis, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe if you want to hear more from me, and I've got scouting reports on every single play I've discussed today, along with about 100 others, on my site hellotofootballtalk.com. Links for that and my social media channels are down below in the description. But let's kick things off with the Tennessee Titans, and I won't waste too much time on this. We've kind of known that this was happening for a couple months now, with Tennessee not really getting involved in the veteran quarterback market, as they take Cam Ward, the quarterback out of Miami. Head coach Brian Callahan is already on the hot seat coming into his second season. They promoted a new GM this offseason. They can't go out there week 1 with Will Levis again, and the volatility he presents. Ward is a legit top 10 prospect in my opinion, and could go first overall in many years. To me, the gap between him and the rest of the class is pretty massive, and his organization needs some excitement. He's a great fit for how Callahan operated with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, as this quick game specialist who identifies pre-snap leverage advantages, but also showcases great anticipation for coverage rotations, and is willing to wait out concepts if you give him time back there. That's where he can get himself into some trouble with his nonchalant ways of paddling away from pressure and taking some chances, but if you build an infrastructure around him to protect him from getting into hero ball mode as much, it'd also enable him to mix in this incredible creativity and vision on secondary reaction plays. That's someone who can sort of revive this franchise. At number 2, the Cleveland Browns. There's certainly more debate around this pick. Which of the 2 true blue chip prospects should Cleveland target here? Could they shock us and take quarterback Shedeur Sanders after all? I won't rule it out, but I think that would be a massive mistake based on where I have him, and it's become clearer as we've gone along here that this is Travis Hunter, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, superstar wide receiver and cornerback. What's interesting about the Browns is that despite the latter 2 of those coming off down seasons, they do have a strong corner trio in house already, with Greg Newsome entering his 5th-year option, and Martin Emerson the back half of his rookie deal, with the big cap hits remaining on Denzel Ward's contract beyond 2025. The guy who'll turn 28 over draft weekend could be a trade target for a contender, and of course Cleveland definitely could use some spark on offense. So this is a situation where Hunter might focus more on refining his skills as a wide receiver and be CB4 as a rookie. He does have great instincts on defense, but the loose movement skills and ball skills also lead as a primary pass catcher. I believe he gives this organization more flexibility, as they still navigate the eventual divorce with the failed experiment that was Deshaun Watson. Third overall, we've got the New York Giants. This creates what I wouldn't call the cleanest fit, and I won't fully rule out quarterback or offensive tackle here, but I believe you have to take Abdul Carter, the edge rusher, out of Penn State here. The reason I bring it up is because they obviously traded for and extended Brian Burns last offseason, and they'll have 5 days after the draft wraps up to make a decision on if they pick up Kayvon Thibodeaux's 5th-year option, along with Evan Neal's, which should be a much easier call. Either way, they'll have those 3 edge defenders on the roster for this season, and they probably can't all start officially unless Carter is off the ball some on early downs. To me, it's much more likely that they use him in that capacity as a movable piece as part of his sub-packages. Carter is not a perfect edge setter in the run game at this point, as he prefers to slip or backdoor blocks to make plays, but I'm not worried about his play strength, as he made the transition this past year. As a pass rusher, the get off and bend are elite. He has natural feel for altering snap cadence and threatening tackles inside out. You've seen plenty of development in his usage of hand combats already, and we could see Big Blue go back to having a truly dominant defensive front alongside Big Dexter Lawrence. At number 4, we've got the New England Patriots. That Week 18 win over Buffalo, sparked by Joe Milton, looms large, as the Pats would otherwise sit at the top of the board and would have all kinds of options, moving down or just grabbing one of those blue chip prospects. Now they sit here with both already taken, and should make sure to help out the highly promising 2nd-year quarterback Drake May. I'll go offensive line here, but slightly different to general consensus, with Armand Membu, the tackle out of Missouri. For anyone who's kept up with my work over the past couple of months, you know I view LSU's Will Campbell as someone who'll be much better suited inside, while Membu is my OT1. Supreme athlete, tremendous ability to anchor against power, has a slight tendency of stopping his feet as he punches with his outside hand, but that can be cleaned up, and he already didn't allow a single quarterback hit or sack this past season. I'd like to see a little more ferocity out of him as a run blocker, but with the recent signing of center Garrett Bradbury, this could indicate more of a transition to a wide zone-based ground game, with how well coordinated and flexible Membu is in that regard. The only holdup would be that he only played right tackle for the Tigers, but if he can make that switch with veteran Morgan Moses locked in on the right side, all of a sudden it's a much more formidable front five. At number 5, I'll go chalk here, which scares me a little bit, because this could be one of those that we've kind of manifested for so long that a changeup kind of throws off the rest of the mock to some degree, but we'll go Mason Graham, interior defensive lineman out of Michigan. This was my number 1 overall prospect heading into the college football season, and even though Michigan had a down year coming off a national title, and that affected his ability to put up numbers, Graham played his best down the stretch, and is just a damn good player for a team that really needs reinforcements on the interior of the defense. He already shows excellent hand placement and has a wrestling background to play gap control, but he also shows the slipperiness and block deconstruction skills to create negative plays in the run game. He may not have a devastating bull rush, and his arms are a little shorter than you'd like to see, but his quickness to threaten the edges of pass protectors, the way he links his arms and hips, how quickly he transitions into secondary maneuvers, he gives guards hell for 60 minutes. The Jags drafted a couple of LCD tackles in Mason Smith and Jordan Jefferson in the 2nd and 4th round respectively last year, but neither one of those guys offers the kind of disruption that Graham brings to the table. I could certainly see Jacksonville add another weapon on offense for Trevor Lawrence, but that's why I have the Las Vegas Raiders going, with another match we've seen in mocks for a while now, as they select Ashton Jeanty, the running back out of Boise State. Is this maybe a little bit optimistic for a team that won 4 games last year and saw everyone get fired? To take a running back this early? Sure. However, when you bring in 73-year-old Pete Carroll, you bring up Chip Kelly back from the college ranks, you retain Patrick Graham as a DC, you trade for and extend Geno Smith. This does not feel like a rebuild whatsoever, and I think they're closer than most people would believe. Jeanty's special, man. His short area quickness, how he navigates through tightly packed areas, his contact balance and determination to never go down on first contact, and then I think he's an underrated pass catcher, simply because he wasn't utilized much that way last year, because they were trying to fuel his Heisman Trophy campaign and really ride him as he was close to beating the NCAA's all-time rushing record. He was a slot receiver until a senior year of high school. They'll need 1 or 2 more pieces on the offensive line eventually to fully maximize what he can do for them, and if Membu is available here, that's easily where they could go as well, but this is the best player on the board here and could be a star right away. If Jeanty isn't the pick here, I fully expect Chip to pound the table for one of his 2 Ohio State guys in the 2nd round. And that actually brings us to the first trade of this mock draft. The New York Jets sent pick 7 to the New Orleans Saints for picks 9 and 93. There's so much speculation around the Saints going quarterback early after the news around Derek Carr's mysterious shoulder injury that could knock him out for the entire 2025 season. Maybe this is the moment where the organization finally views this as a reset point, swallow some of the money and the pride to be honest, and looks ahead to next year's class, where they could bring in the nephew of one of the 2 legendary quarterbacks in franchise history with Arch Manning. But nothing they've actually done this offseason would indicate that before we had a wrench thrown into this thing recently. Either way, General Manager Mickey Loomis has 7 picks inside the top 200 at his disposal after dealing with diminished draft capital for years now due to different trade-ups, and they're burning a hole into its pockets, along with just wanting to make sure neither the Jets themselves nor the division rival Panthers select offensive lineman Will Campbell out of LSU. As I already mentioned, I believe his limited wingspan and how he deals with power when rushers have a runway into contact will give him trouble at tackle, but with the recent retirement of Ryan Ramczyk, they could move last year's first rounder Talisi Fuaga back to the right side where he played in college when Trevor Penning's rookie deal runs out after this season. Meanwhile, Campbell would be an immediate upgrade at left guard over Dylan Raduns. Tremendous intelligence, football character, agility, and balance to also give the unit some more insurance after how they fell off due to injuries last year. A little bit quick on the Carolina Panthers at 8 here. We heard Kay Adams wiggle out of head coach Dave Canales that they probably need to address the defense here because they've done plenty to support Bryce Young on offense, and he showed great promise once he returned to the lineup for the second half of last season. Now they need to take pressure off him to not score 30 points every week, and I believe they were very intrigued with the upside of Shamar Stewart, the edge defender out of Texas A&M. In no way a finished product at this point, where he's not really countering blocking schemes or rushing the passes with much of a plan yet, but his production was heavily limited by his role as a 4 or 5 technique on early downs, and if you put on the tape, you do see his ability to fuck up plays. He has insane strength and twitch, can knife through gaps if you use him on slants, his speed to power can be devastating, and what stands out to me most, for someone who played at nearly 300 pounds at A&M, was his ability to disassociate his upper and lower half, to dip around blockers. If Trayvon Walker is a number 1 overall pick a couple of years ago, this guy can absolutely go top 10. That brings us to the New York Jets. After moving a couple of spots back, Gangrene is another one of those teams that will probably jump at the opportunity to select offensive tackle Armand Membu and put together a great young duo of bookends with him and last year's first rounder Olu Fashanu. But if he's off the board, they could add someone lining up next to him in Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State. Contrary to popular belief, this isn't your prototypical wide tight end who drives edge defenders off the ball and boosts their run game in that regard, even though he has to frame to be that kind of guy eventually, simply because he wasn't asked to do that last year a whole lot with the Nittany Lions, but he did just about everything else. You're probably not going to use him a whole lot as a wildcat quarterback if Justin Fields is a starting QB, but you're going to find ways to get the ball in this guy's hands. I have Michigan's Colston Loveland as my tight end 1 personally, but he's literally just ahead of Warren because he isn't quite as fluent in skill as a route runner. But you let Warren run drags, leak into the flats off play action, allow him to win at the catch point down the field, and when the ball is in his hands, this guy becomes a monster truck who will run through, shrug off, or leap over would-be tacklers. Closing out the top 10 with the Chicago Bears. So now the top 2 offensive linemen based on consensus sports are gone, Ashton Jeanty and Tyler Warren as offensive weapons aren't there. Where do the Bears go? If the NFL is comfortable with Ohio State left tackle Josh Simmons, medically, I believe he's worthy of this selection, since Chicago can wait a little bit on him, but with the complete overhaul of the interior of that unit, I feel comfortable with them going defense and adding one more piece to that front with Michael Williams, the edge defender out of Georgia. I'm a little bit lower personally than this, because I believe he has a ways to go as a pass rusher, but there are no questions about him in run defense. This guy's hands made of stone to create knockback on contact, and then can slide off blocks to wrap up the ball carrier. He'll need to diversify his pass rush portfolio, but clearly the GM Ryan Poles and veteran defensive coordinator Dennis Allen appreciate his combination of length and strength on the edge, along with his football character, battling through that bummed up ankle. Now you have him, Montez Sweat, you sign veteran Grady Jarrett, and Dayo Odeyingbo as someone who can slide inside on longer downs. Along with other rotational players, I believe we could see a big time bounce back for that defense. At number 11, the San Francisco 49ers. They are another team that could absolutely look at the D-line with who is left alongside Nick Bosa, and I'm personally not happy with Colton McKivitz as he penciled a start at right tackle, but they also lost Travaris Ward at corner, who they kind of structured the coverages around and clearly felt when he wasn't available, and that matches up with who I believe is the top name left on the board in Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan. To me, he's one of the most overthought prospects in this entire class. Yes, we don't have a 40 time on him, and he may not have big time recovery burst, but it rarely ever shows up on tape unless he bit on the double move. He can widen the release of receivers, he's so fluid to roll through transitions and stick to the hip pocket. His football IQ to identify splits and tendencies, midpoint routes, and feather off assignments in zone coverage to make plays on the ball is up there with some of the best I've ever seen in a college corner. And while there's room to improve as a tackler, he's disciplined and involved in run defense. So what's not to like? I think this is a slam dunk. Next up, the Dallas Cowboys at number 12. I'm not going to rule out Jerry Jones making a power move up to 8 or 9 if Ashton Jeanty falls a little bit, and they have a history of targeting linebackers early in the draft, which would make sense if they love Alabama's Jahar Campbell. But what was missing most on the roster, even when they had Dak Prescott there, was that second receiver alongside CeeDee Lamb, especially one that could win on the outside, and that's where Tetro McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona, comes into play. One of the weirdest pre-draft processes I can ever remember for a player, similar to the guy we just discussed in Will Johnson, as T-Mac ran somewhere in the low to mid 4.5s, and suddenly people started talking about how he can separate. A bigger discussion can be had about that topic, and how speed is truly related to guys being able to get open in the NFL, but at 6'4", this guy's really fluid, can step way outside his frame and has a clear understanding for how to affect the eyes of defensive backs with tilts and body language. I'd like to see a little bit more dog in him, and him playing with gas in the dry phase of routes, where he does a great job attacking the ball at its apex, and I don't think he gets enough credit for what he can do once the ball is in his hands, pulling through arm tackles and covering ground with those long strides. He'd give that unit a much different feel. 13th overall, the Miami Dolphins. Here's one where I'll kinda call my shot. Along with South Carolina safety Nick Emanwori, offensive line is the most common projection for Miami, but it's the name I paired up with them that may be a little bit surprising to people, and that is Josh Simmons, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State. His tape over the first half of 2024 is as good as any offensive lineman in this draft, and with the retirement of left tackle Teron Armstead, they desperately need to find a long-term solution there. You cannot go into the season with Liam Eichenberg locked into that spot. Simmons' agility and overall athleticism to take care of backside cutoffs or escort the ball out to the corner makes him a perfect fit for Miami's perimeter-oriented rushing attack, whether on wide zone or getting him out there as a pull and toss plays. I thought he improved his punch timing and his ability to brace for power as a pass protector. He can change up his approach effectively depending on who he's facing, and keeps his mids connected with defenders deep into the play clock with how much Miami relies on play action and RPOs. The big question of course is the torn patella tendon and if he's ready for week 1, but as we close in on draft night, it sounds like teams are more and more encouraged by his progress. Next up we've got the Indianapolis Colts. Maybe more than any other pick in the first round, the Colts have been connected to Tyler Warren as part of the mock drafts basically since February. That makes me feel like it isn't actually going to happen, and in this case he's not available anyway, yet I will stick with the tight end position, and it may actually be a better fit with Colston Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan. The reason I say this is because they already have a good run after catch receiver in Michael Pittman Jr., a vertical ball winner in Alec Pierce, Josh Downs is pretty much pigeonholed into the slot, they hope Adonai Mitchell can take a step on the outside in year 2. The tight end contributions last year were absolutely abysmal, both in receiving totals and even more so as blockers. As I already hinted at, Loveland right now is the more fundamentally sound inline player, with experience on a variety of pro-style rushing concepts, slicing across the formation and snatching up targets on the move to support a QB run game. Along with that, he's an incredibly easy mover who can be a mismatch player in the passing game that can be moved around the formation. He's deceptive with head fakes, tracks the ball like it's set in nature, and he may not be a yak freak like Warren, but he's very elusive and consistently adds yardage for his team. At pick 15, the Atlanta Falcons, we get to the two bird teams starting with the letter A. We're also connected by the fact that they desperately need help in the front 7. There are a few different names I could see for the Falcons here, and they are rumored to be a potential trade back spot, with only 5 draft picks as of right now, and 2 of those coming in the 7th round. But based on the temperature of the league, I had to find a spot for Jalen Walker, the linebacker/edge out of Georgia. He's also a very late first rounder on my board, in part because I don't know exactly how he should be used at the next level. His best tape came on the edge, but he's undersized and short for that role, while his ability to ID the action as an off-ball player is underdeveloped at this point. Nonetheless, his get-off and ankle mobility to threaten the outside shoulder of tackles, and then the quick twitch to win with crossface move stands out. He can cover plenty of ground in coverage, and his closing burst as a quarterback spike jumps off the screen. So that's kinda where I project him for Atlanta. Someone who may not be a starter at day 1, but with how much Raheem Morris likes to blitz his linebackers, he'll be heavily involved in that regard. New DC Jeff Ulbrich has experience with undersized guys on the edge. Allow Walker to be a chaos player rather than limiting him to one defined role, and we know coaches absolutely adore the energy he brings to the field. Similarly, the Arizona Cardinals at 16th overall lack true difference makers on the first and second level of the defense, even after re-signing Kaiser White. And I actually feel even better about this match if he's paired with Jahar Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama. One of the nation's top recruits on the edge 3 years ago, didn't get onto the field a whole lot early on due to guys like Will Anderson, Dallas Turner and others in front of him, so he transitions to linebacker and things really start to click for him last year. When he sees it and trusts his eyes, he gets there in a hurry, man. Has the length and suddenness to keep blockers off his frame, his movement skills and coverage to go laterally or run with guys in match assignments stands out, and then his skills to rush off the edge, turn the corner, win on in and out moves. He can contribute in a variety of ways. Now you give him to Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis, who have shown the willingness to embrace a lot of ideas and be creative, especially on passing downs, but didn't always have the pieces for sustained success. I love what Campbell could bring to the table as someone who's allowed to roam freely and be the designated rush backer in place of Mack Wilson, while White can clean up the trash he creates. Which leads us into the second half of this first round mock, with the Cincinnati Bengals at 17th overall. This was a bit of a tougher one, because Cincy could still use some help on the interior O-line, but really it's a defense where you can basically take a look at every single position with how monumental the fall-off was in 2024. Mission D tackle Kenneth Grant is someone I've connected to them on several occasions, but they need guys to contribute right away and help turn this unit around, and that's where Jahdae Barron, the cornerback out of Texas, comes into play. Some people question his ability to play on the outside in the pros. I believe he can be a quality starter there, but a legit Pro Bowl nickel, with them being unlikely to bring back 31-year-old free agent Mike Hilton with all the recent cap commitments, this frees them up to allow former first-round pick Dax Hill and lastly a second-rounder DJ Turner to compete for the field side corner spot most likely, and Barron can even play some safety if they want to use dime packages. This guy's ability to identify formations pre-snap, adjust draw combinations, and muddy up the picture for quarterbacks is outstanding. His boxing background shows up in his ability to use his hands at the line, mirror releases, plus then his ability to punch the pocket and take whoopee completions off the table is rare. 18th overall, the Seattle Seahawks. It's been an all off-season for Seattle, switching from Geno Smith to Sam Darnold at quarterback, trading DK Metcalf, but then signing Cooper Kupp when they unlocked JSN in his second season in the slot, not doing anything with the cash available to address one of the shakiest offensive lines in the league. I believe that's where they have to go here, and I'm going to arguably go with the biggest riser of this pre-draft process in Gray Sable out of North Dakota State. In theory, the Seahawks have a nice young tackle tandem, only Abe Lucas has rarely been available since his rookie year. Sable was a quality starter on both ends of the line for NDSU, but slid inside to guard as well. He also lined up everywhere during Senior Bowl week and barely lost a rep. With 32-inch arms, I project him primarily on the inside, but he's such a tremendous athlete, really good at latching and sustaining to project for offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak's zone-based rushing attack, along with the active hands and mirroring skills to survive on an island as a pass protector. He's one of those names I think the league has fallen in love with, and probably doesn't make it outside the top 25. Which brings us to our next trade, as I've Jim Harbaugh and the Los Angeles Chargers moving up for one of the guys he described as a gift of the football gods, and that is Kenneth Grant, the interior defensive lineman out of Michigan. So in the scenario, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers sent pick 19 to the Chargers for picks 22 and 125. Not to make this too much about his connection with the Wolverine program, but it just matches up very well with where this team could use some help if either Tyler Colson Loveland or Grant makes it into his range, where Harbaugh jumps the division route Broncos, and maybe more importantly the Pittsburgh Steelers, in order to secure the uber-talented D-tackle here. I believe beyond this, the priority will be supporting Justin Herbert on offense, with some reinforcements at the wide receiver, interior O-line, but right now Deshaun Hand and Tio Tart are penciled the starters alongside of Tito Bonia in the 3-4 base. Those first are much more suited as rotational pieces, while Grant would immediately boost the run defense that was average in terms of success rate last year, while Jesse Minter at DC kinda did wonders for them on the back end. Grant needs to play with more consistent technique against double teams, and as a pass rusher his approach is fairly simplistic at this point, but you can't teach that kind of power. He packs a sneaky swim move, shows a hell of activity with his hands, and has a knack for batting down balls at the line. Closing out the top 20 with another AFC West team coming off a surprising playoff appearance in the Denver Broncos. This roster is pretty damn complete if you go through it, especially after filling some areas of need during the offseason. Sean Payton has been talking about wanting to find his joker on offense, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind either one of those top two tight ends making it here, even after signing Evan Ingram for agency. So I'll go with another freaking player match here with Omarion Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina. To me, he's clearly RB2 in his class, and absolutely worth the selection, at least for a team that doesn't have any glaring needs at high value positions. Sure, Payton has a history of wanting to rotate his backs to keep them fresh and put different skill sets onto the field, but you're looking at role players in Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime, even Tyler Beatty. They lack that ace, and I believe Hampton can be that. This is a 220-pound back with sweet feet and a surprising ability to get skinny through creases, especially on inside zone concepts. He's not a particular creative open field runner, but his indirect contact balance and re-acceleration after shrugging off tacklers is special. He'll also make the play action attack all the more effective. Which brings us to pick number 21 and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and this is where the fall stops. I was trying to find a spot for Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback out of Colorado, and could easily see him go in the top 10 after all, but this is much closer in line with where I value him and what the player's upside dictates. The lack of pure arm talent and mobility have been discussed before, but you'll hear so many people talk about his anticipation and throw around a loose term like processing that I just believe there's a misconception around what he was asked to do in that offense, where he only ran like 6 to 8 concepts, and there were a lot of see it, hit it throws, along with giving his playmakers chances. Having said that, I do believe there are qualities to Sanders' game that could allow him to become a solid starter. He has good general accuracy, he's very comfortable spreading the field out in a quick rhythm passing attack, can put plenty of air on his deep balls, and is tough as nails in the pocket. those skills could match well with the receivers Pittsburgh has in place already, and Arthur Smith at offensive coordinator, because I almost like him best delivering the ball in designed rollouts and boots. I'm not sure if this is the correct course for a team that invested into quarterback in this range a couple of years ago with Kenny Pickett, and this is where I struggle with Shedeur, as this was my last line of the scouting report. The physical tools simply aren't there to overcome some of the tendencies of drifting inside the pocket, and scar tissue is built up if he doesn't land on a team with the infrastructure to allow him to win back his trust for the pocket. So I'm rooting for this guy to prove me wrong, but I just have some reservations about him. At number 22 now of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the Bucs could certainly stick at 19 and pick this player, but adding an extra 4th rounder when there really isn't a team to worry about snatching up their guy in this range, unless it's the Chargers themselves, will let them know their intentions in this scenario. This is a near optimal outcome for Jason Licht and company when they select Donovan Izaraku, the edge defender of Boston College. There are certainly freaky athletes on the edge in this draft class, but maybe no one among it can win in so many different ways as this young man, varying his step cadence, different hand swipes, Euro step moves, transitioning to counters. He gives tackles hell. He's not a big time power rusher, but can condense the pocket enough if facing soft sets, and at 250 pounds, there are guys who set a firmer edge at the point of attack, but he strikes low and chases hard off the backside. Tampa has these big, long bodies up front in Yaya Diaby and Logan Hall, but they just took a fly on veteran Hassan Reddick, and if paired with Izaraku, now you can unleash those guys on the inside and love Kalasha Kansi to get home with 4, instead of relying so much on fire zones and putting pressure on the secondary. 23rd overall, the Green Bay Packers, host for this draft. This was one of the picks I struggle with the most. Wide receivers among the main priorities when you look at what mock draft simulators would label as team needs, but we know the Packers won't go there in the first round. Offensive tackle very much could be an option, depending on how they shuffle around Elton Jenkins and Zach Tom, but I ultimately went with a bit of a surprise pick here, because I needed to find a spot for him, and the more I looked into him, the more it made sense, and that is Walter Nolan, the interior defensive lineman out of Ole Miss. And here's the reasoning. The team has more money tied up with 29 players in 2026 than this year with 70 players. And that's before the draft. So they need to make decisions on both Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt from the 2022 class, where the 50 option for both of them would be around $14 million, and offering less flexibility for them down the stretch if they don't get long-term deals done. Even if they believe Wyatt's developmental curve is pointing up again after taking a slight step back last year, they could use some more juice on the inside. Kenny Clark had 435 pass rush snaps last season, but pretty much had his least productive year on that regard, finishing with just 34 total pressures. So maybe Nolan doesn't start him base as a rookie, but then they sub him on passing downs especially, along with keeping your guys fresh generally, since looking at what this Jeff Hafley coached defense really lacked last season, to be a true difference-making unit was the front 4 consistently getting home. Now, the Vikings are next here, but 2 spots later the Rams are lurking, with the Texans sandwiched between the two and screaming a need for a left tackle after trading away Laremy Tunsil. So I have the Minnesota Vikings trading picks 24 and 187 to the Los Angeles Rams for picks 26, 127 and 202. And with that selection, the Rams grabbed Josh Connolly Jr., the offensive tackle out of Oregon, who is my personal OT3. You may not look at this as the Rams' biggest need right now, since they could certainly use some help at linebacker and corner, but the value isn't really there, and the tackle market quickly dries up after this point. They did re-sign Alaric Jackson to a fairly substantial price, with how offensive linemen overall were overpaid in this year's free agency cycle, but the guy on the right end of the line, Rob Havenstein, is also entering his final season on the contract and will turn 33 a couple of weeks after the draft. Connolly did line up some on the right side for unbalanced sets, and flipped over some during Senior Bowl week, even though that's where his worst rep came, getting run over by Marshall's Mike Green in a clip that kinda went viral. But this guy already made massive strides from his sophomore to his junior year, and his potential is sky high. Elite athleticism and foot quickness to be weaponized in the wide zone offense, even as Sean McVay has kinda gone away from it more and more, but also pulling out to the corner on tosses or clearing the path on screens. That's along with being smooth and thoughtful in his pass sets, even though he needs to learn to not allow opposing rushers to establish first meaningful contact as regularly. So now I picked 25 with the Houston Texans. They sit here with the only offensive tackle left, being Kellen Banks Jr. from Texas, and he has some things to clean up in his pass sets before I feel comfortable with him being a full-time starter there. Instead, we'll help out CJ Stroud and some of the protection issues that haunted Houston last season by giving them an option to get the ball out more quickly to someone that CJ is already very familiar with in Mekhi Egbuka, the wide receiver out of Ohio State. who maybe doesn't have the same kind of top end ceiling as a couple of other names they could be looking at here, but he presents one of the highest floors of any player in what everyone in the industry consistently describes as a starter class. Excellent short area quickness to separate in the short to intermediate area, natural instincts to fight open space within the zone coverage, adjusts to the ball very well, and super efficient with getting upfield as a chain mover. That's for a team that just took a 1-year fly on veteran Stephon Diggs, and may not get any contributions from Tank Dell, coming off that scary injury around Christmas. So now Nico Collins obviously is the ace for them as the primary X, and Ibuka is kind of an interchangeable role with free agency addition Christian Kirk between the slot and Z. At 26, the Minnesota Vikings. Vikes now up a couple of spots back, and still kind of have the choice of defensive backs beyond what's generally considered the clean corner trio at the top. One match I've had written down for them would have been Ole Miss cornerback Trey Amos, thanks to his reactionary skills to pattern match, with how much we saw a defensive coordinator want to play more isolated coverage down the stretch. But I can't pass up Malachi Starks, the safety out of Georgia here. A top 10 prospect in the class for me, this guy can fill a variety of roles on the back end for a defense that lost Cam Bynum for agency, and already had stalwart safety Harrison Smith be on the fringe of tears deciding about if he'll return for one more year. Starks is some of the best instincts, football IQ and ball skills you're going to find packaged into any college safety. Otherwise, he would not have started for Kirby Smart in one of the more complex defensive systems as a true freshman. He can also drop down into the slot and be a full-time nickel if they decide to move Byron Murphy back outside, or stick with heavy free safety packages where Josh Metellus is that kind of roam in the middle of the field as a de facto dime linebacker. He just gives them a lot of flexibility with future decisions. Now, I would have loved to pair the Baltimore Ravens up with Starks as a classic example of a team that always has good football players fall into their lap as the NFL overthinks them, but I'll give them another one here in the same mold, and that is Tyler Booker, the interior offensive lineman out of Alabama. I understand why he'd make it here, because this guy is much better in a phone booth than out in space, and he won't be a perfect fit for a team that wants to stretch opponents horizontally in the run game, but I could see him go earlier than this as well, because people around the league have raved about a football character and leadership, and some of those limitations will be mitigated by what Baltimore will ask him to do. He can be a maul for a gap scheme heavy approach, creating vertical displacement on double teams and kicking out edge defenders, and in pass pro, he may not be the most fleet of foot, but he's technically sound, and once he gets those clamps on people, it's over. He'll be an immediate upgrade over Andrew Voorhees at left guard, and make Derrick Henry going downhill and even scare a proposition for opponents. Ozzie Newsome may not be the official GM there anymore, but he still has a strong influence as an advisor, and we know his ties with the Alabama program. Bringing us to the Detroit Lions. Funnily enough, the Vikings going with Malachi Starks a couple picks earlier created ripple effects, as I would have otherwise had the Lions replace one of the stars at guard with Booker. A Donovan Jackson from Ohio State could be very much in the cards here, and they need a Robin to Aiden Hutchinson Batman on the edge defensively. But one more guy would make the receiving corps feel different here, so I'm gonna go with Matthew Golden, the wide receiver out of Texas. Anyone who's followed my analysis throughout the process knows I'm a little bit low on him than consensus, as I personally have him down as my wide receiver 6, but I can acknowledge the talent and what he can add to a room. I don't think he plays up to that 4.29 speed, he's a little inefficient snapping off routes, and the alignment of his hands isn't always optimal. Still, Golden shows an advanced release game, varied footwork and pacing, being able to navigate around ancillary zone defenses efficiently, and then with the ball in his hands, he has the vision and understanding for angles of a punt returner. He makes a lot of sense here, paired with the speed of Jameson Williams, and the steady drumbeat of a possession star receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown. That brings us to the 4 conference championship participants, and I discussed the different options for these teams in much more detail with a couple of friends from the Draft Professor last Wednesday. If you go to the overview of my YouTube channel, you'll find a playlist called Podcast Appearances if you're interested in checking it out. But at number 29, the Washington Commanders. As a reference there, it's kind of a general theme. While I understand the motivation to quickly maximize the rookie quarterback window with Jaden Daniels, I think they need to be honest with the general state of the roster and take a holistic view here, considering the gap you felt talent-wise when they lost to Phil in the NFC title game. One more receiver to pair with Terry McLaurin, and the 1-year gamble on Deebo Samuel would make sense if Golden makes it here, and I could see them grab another outside corner so they can move Mike Sainristil back inside. However, I addressed the secondary otherwise with Nick Evanwari, the safety out of South Carolina. Another name I'm personally a little bit lower on because he falls under the category of guys who are prescribed this great versatility in the back end, but in reality, it's kind of tough to find one spot for them to fit in, as I don't want to match him anyone from depth, and there's some stiffness to him redirecting in space. Still, he has great spatial awareness, plays with a bounce to his step if deployed in the box, and he's a freak athlete who plays with a ton of energy. Dan Quinn has experience with these bigger safeties and dime backers after he brought in Jeremy Chin for last year, and they were very well in the experience with the coverage menu last season in Washington. At pick number 30 with the Buffalo Bills, who I've previously mentioned is a potential trade-up candidate, which isn't necessarily in the DNA of general manager Brandon Beane and head coach Sean McDermott, but they're at a stage with this roster where they've kind of maximized what they can do with a bunch of solid pieces who are well coached and work as a unit defensively. They need difference makers. They get one here without having to spend extra capital to move up in Derek Harmon, the tier defensive lineman out of Oregon. My ideal too, even though there's certainly a gap to Michigan's Mason Graham, but the reason I love him is that he can be useful for you in so many different ways, whether he's asked to stack and jet and gap control assignments, or he's allowed to get upfield and arm over blockers. Last year he remodeled his own body when he dropped about 20 pounds and went from a run-stuffing nose tackle to one of the top interior pass rushers in the country. Harmon can create vertical displacement, work push-pull moves off that, and what he's so good at is his ability to identify where protectors kind of make themselves vulnerable, transition to secondary maneuvers. Him and Oliver next to each other on the inside in passing situations will be a rough sight for opposing offensive lines. Love this fit. Which brings us to the team that actually beat them in the AFC divisional rounds, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs. This is one where I've heard from a couple of people pretty plugged in with the Chiefs that they don't believe that offensive line is much of a priority early on at least, after surprisingly handing former 49er Jalen Moore a pretty big bag of money, and last year's second runner Kingsley Suamataia projected to slide inside the left guard. But I'm not allowing those two guys to keep him from taking one of the best players remaining, so I went with Calvin Banks Jr., the offensive tackle / interior O-lineman out of Texas. Again, I have some reservations about him plugging in the left tackle right away and protecting Patrick Mahomes, but they do generally get the ball out pretty quickly, and I think it makes a lot of sense for how they want to run the ball, creating displacements on gap and inside zone, the violence he brings as a puller to kick out or wrap around and lead up on backers, and if he works on taking the fight to pass rushers instead of catching them as much, he has a pretty damn high ceiling and protection as well. I believe he immediately competes for both spots on the left side, and should allow us to get the best two guys out there, with plenty of room to grow as part of the new wave over there. Bringing us to the final pick of this mock draft, and this is where I'll give you a little two-way go. I'll try to keep it brief. If the Eagles decide to stick at 32, I've then taken Nick Scorton, the edge defender out of Texas A&M. They need to add someone on the edge after losing Josh Sweat to free agency and Brandon Graham retiring. Scorton is a guy who can convert speed to power similar to Sweat, but for his bigger frame, he's also surprisingly flexible and can challenge tackles in various ways. Played overweight for A&M last year, oftentimes it's his 4 out of 5 technique, where his role in early downs didn't lend itself to great production, but heavy hands at the point of attack, looked pretty light on his feet when Purdue asked him to drop into coverage in 2023, and you hope you can tap into what he showed as a pass rusher that year again. Or the alternative here, the New York Giants move up 2 spots from 34 overall in exchange for sliding on 29 spots in the 4th round, so from 105 to 134. Certainly a win for Philly based on any of the trade value charts, but Howie Roseman squeezes this one out of the division rivals, so they can make sure to jump the Browns with the first pick on day 2 and secure themselves the 50 option for Jackson Dart, the quarterback out of Ole Miss. Could easily be Alabama's Jalen Milroe here as well, who presents a higher ceiling as a superb athlete with a howitzer attached to his right shoulder. They brought in both Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston to give either rookie some time early, but head coach Brian Daboll and general manager Joe Shane need to win this year and show some promise for them to stick around. Dart is a hyper-competitive, tough kid with plenty of big-time throws and key runs on tape to get you excited, but it's very tough to reject a guy from that system and a Lane Kiffin to the NFL with the insane amount of free access throws and designer plays. Here at the end of night 1, I think that's much more worthy of taking a gamble, as it sounds like ownership gives them one more go at it with making a decision of this magnitude. So here's a look at all 32 picks. A couple of notable names are left off. Mike Green, the edge defender out of Marshall. I just have no idea how to weigh sexual assault allegation that led to him leaving Virginia before becoming one of the top players at his position, and purely based on tape, he's inside my top 10 overall prospects. Luther Burden III, wide receiver Missouri, not too far behind Green for me as in wide receiver 2, not taking Travis Hunter into account. His production dropped off substantially, and people say he looked disengaged at times, but the Tigers' offense was a mess in 2024, and personally I'd be fully willing to bet on the talents. James Pierce Jr., the edge defender out of Tennessee, with whom it's much more about on-field character concerns and how seriously he takes his future profession, based on reports out there, but should be very much on the radar in the 20s. And Jalen Milroe, who we already discussed, a quarterback out of Alabama, I know received an invite, and if he ends up being the pick for the Steelers at 21, I will not be shocked. I just don't believe he's worth that kind of investment for as strong as his arm is and the speed that he has, because it's such a massive project before he can be considered at all in a starting capacity. But that's gonna do it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed my annual mock draft, please hit the like button for me. And if you're new, why don't you also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to know whenever I upload a video. Let me know what you think down in the comments, a pick you loved, one you hated, one that maybe confused you. If you've got any other questions, I'm happy to answer. I'll have a massive recap of the draft, and also most likely an article on some UDFAs who could make an early impact coming up, before we get to our annual divisional draft and roster review series, where I discuss all the moves made this offseason for all 32 teams, with a heavy focus on the rookie classes, and share my thoughts on how all those pieces fit within the plans. That's another massive undertaking, beyond all the work I've put in evaluating 350 plus prospects, yet again for the cycle. I've got like 130 of those written up scouting reports for you guys to check out in written form, or on my site Footballtalk.com. If you're interested in diving deeper into the names discussed today, and many others. You can also follow me on social media to stay up to date with everything I'm working on, and my thoughts around the sport as a whole. Later on we'll get to talk about training camp battles, fantasy gems, and then the season will be back around before we even know it. So don't click that dial, I've got you covered all off season, and would love to have you along for the ride. So until then, see you later, peace!